Today we're going on a scenery journey that's taken over 10 years to create. Welcome to the Siege of Gondor Megaboard, the biggest wargaming board in YouTube history.
Last week we saw the second edition of Tubertown, a massive collaboration with a bunch of YouTubers all working to finish the second city suburb of my massive Minas Tirith megaboard. And today we finally, after over 3 years of work and nearly 20 videos, are ready to close the first chapter of this massive crafting experience as we finally unveil my Guinness World Record attempt at the largest Middle-earth wargaming board in the history of the planet. Today we're not only finishing off Tubertown 2.0 and then finally laying out the full Minas Tirith board, but for the first time ever, we are connecting the full Siege of Gondor megaboard by adding my 3 super boards, Minas Tirith, the Pelennor Fields, and of course the flooded city of Osgiliath, all together to form the Siege of Gondor Monster World Record Attempt wargaming layout. But first, we need to actually finish Tubertown 2.0. In the last episode, we met our amazing new buildings, the Nat 1 Video Strategium, the Kit Bash Box Adventurers Bazaar, the Anders Hobbies House of Araphant, the Microforge Minis Merchant House, the Real Terrain Hobbies Tavern, and of course the Narb Makes Gondorian Brothel Archives, where Gandalf learned all about his ring. Check out all of those amazing buildings in detail in the collab playlist linked in the comments below. They are all so incredible. But of course, many of you will have noticed that my part of the city, built around and underneath the incredible structures, is not yet finished. So up first, we need to tighten up all the build work I did in the last build by sealing all the joins around the modeling compound texture, foam trim, and any structural pieces with grout and Geek Gaming PVA glue. I ran a seam of glue down any exposed crack that needed to be filled or any area that needs a little extra strength, and then soaked it with isopropyl alcohol and then matte scenic sealant. The alcohol allows the sealant to penetrate the layers of the grout and make sure that the entire grout layer gets activated by the water in the sealant. And then that all dries rock hard and makes the board so much more durable. Grout itself isn't just a lovely grit texture, it is of course an adhesive in and of itself. I also saturated the entire modeling compound layer in sealant with the same method to get that super resistant to wear and tear, and then left that all to dry overnight. Once fully dry to the touch, it then gets a heavy prime in Rust-Oleum White surface primer with 2 coats. And this is really important, as combined with the varnish in the sealant underneath, this should help the compound from just absorbing any of the washes we're going to put down and enable us to actually get some solid recessed detail, which is something I struggled with in the last Tubertown painting session. Once dry, I busted out the oil paints and slapped down an all-over grey oil wash down on the tiles to give the white a nice subtle recess that doesn't get as contrasty as that kind of classic black terrain wash. Big shout out to Eric's Hobby Workshop, who showed me this technique while making his amazing crafting guild for the first Tubertown collab. Then I got my nice thin blend of burnt sienna and burnt umber, and I splodged and splashed that pretty much all over the place to help build up some dirt and grime, and boom, our painting is done. So easy, and it just looks awesome. And for a moment, I thought I was finished, and I was ready to start beginning to assemble a whole massive board. Then I realized there's a huge chunk of this board that is still green foam, the Pelennor Fields before the walls. If you haven't seen the full build journey for the 48 square feet Pelennor Field board, I'll link it above, but it was vital that this little section out the front of these walls matched it perfectly. So I grabbed some stone finished texture paint and slapped that down all over the board, which was hard work because this paint is now like 10 years old from the very first Osgiliath build, but I got it working and got some texture down over that green foam to build up that natural texture. And then when that was dry, I began to work in a layer of blended browns to establish our ground tones. Stipples and dry brushes kind of mixed together, but then I kind of ran out of paint because my workshop is slowly getting packed down around me before the move to New Zealand, so I had to use an old technique that I don't really go for anymore and grab at some of the old rattle cans that I used when I first made the original board, and I hit that ground covering with some accent dustings and little spritzers to give it a bit of life. And man, I just forgot how good this looks. It's sort of like a mottling effect. It doesn't really show up well on camera, but the natural variation created by the two browns and then the dustings of a beige over the top to kind of accent it, it just looks quite realistic. A big shout out to Dan from Full Scaled Conflict for teaching me this technique ages ago when we built the first Pelennor board, and I think I might have to start bringing it back for kind of earthy base tones. I really like it. Then it was time for our static grass. Now here we have a bit of a problem, as I shipped off all of my static grass blends that I did use for the Pelennor board to New Zealand when I made our Edoras piece back in December. The video for that one is linked above. It's an awesome video, definitely check it out. But right now I kind of had to wing it with the bits and pieces I had left lying around the workshop, and I found a couple of small tubs of old 2mm spring and 4mm summer. The application process here is very simple. First I threw down some seams of Geek Gaming fast drying basing glue and then spread it out with a brush to create like a really uneven coverage pattern. We want some of those kind of elements of the basey texture peeking through the glue in little splotches, but I did make sure that it goes hard all the way up to the edges of the board and the walls, because that way this board is going to blend seamlessly with all the other boards in the build. Then after allowing a good sort of 10 minutes for that glue to start going tacky but not fully skinning over, I then grabbed my static grass applicator and started putting down the 2mm spring. You want some mid-level coverage but not complete. We want enough space in the glue for all the layers to be mixed into that same foundation, and I actually ran out of this 2mm before getting the coverage over the whole board anyway, which ended up looking kind of cooler than I thought because it just adds more variation. Not everywhere has that brighter green undertone. Next I grabbed our 4mm summer and I did the same process, and you'll notice that the longer fibers, 4mm versus 2mm, experience the electric field much more strongly and thus stand up taller in the glue due to some electromagnetism phenomena I won't bore you with. And I then recovered the entire 2mm application area and then basically the whole board, just building up more and more and more grass, and even used the empty applicator and worked the areas of the already placed grass in circular motions to get a better stand-up effect on the fibers I'd already placed. With those down, we've got a lovely grass profile, which is nice but too uniform, and we really don't want that golf green look. But hobby challenges like realistic ground covering aren't the only thing on my radar at the moment. The big move to New Zealand has essentially functioned as a bit of a reset button for my work and family life and for my career here on Zorpazorp, and Skillshare is a fantastic way to gain greater control of your career and creative path. Now you might know Skillshare for their courses in film and video editing, but they have hundreds of career-focused classes too. The new year is the perfect time to reinvent your goals and yourself. Zorpazorp was a huge career shift for me, and Skillshare gives me the power to keep reskilling as my industry and my needs change. With so much going on in life, time management and productivity has just been so key for me. So I've been checking out Ali Abdal's course Productivity for Creators, and it's been so helpful. So jumpstart your 2023 goals now with this exclusive offer. Try Skillshare free for 7 days and then get 20% off your first year. This is technically where I left the original Pelennor board. I didn't add any extra layers, although of course I had those other blends with more colors to make it interesting. So this time I just couldn't resist spicing it up with a few other simple ingredients. With the fibers acting as that kind of main grass body layer, I then grabbed some foam flocks, first a dark green and then a yellow brown, and started mixing these through the grasses. The darker green I used in small clumps to kind of act as little patches of clover or different plants across the Pelennor, whereas the yellow-brown I sprinkled more broadly to tone different areas of grass. Maybe there's like some dead grass under those layers, as well as blending into some of the dirt sections that have no static grass on them. You will have noticed that while I was static grassing, I was actually vacuuming up the excess with my little mini vac to allow that dirt layer to shine through and not get covered, and now this flock can help blend those two layers together. Then the final touch was a sprinkle of Geek Gaming Scrublands Base Ready for some more gravel and rocks and sand aggregates to add even more richness to the board. To make this solid and sound for gaming, I gave it a soak in isopropyl alcohol and then Geek Gaming Matte Scenic Sealant. The alcohol helps the sealant penetrate all the way through the fibers and down to the lower substrates, rather than the glue kind of just sitting on the top of all the big spiky fibers, and then that joins the sealant all the way down to the glue base layer and makes one big locked structure of adhesive. And man, this is going to be tough as for gaming now. Work in small portions when you're applying this, so you put your alcohol down first and then you glue straight away so the alcohol doesn't evaporate by the time you come back to putting down your sealant. Then I whacked in the walls, added a couple of little sprinkles of flock for any final required detail, and the Pelennor is finished. If you want to make a grass setup similar to this, you can grab all of the products from my online store, Zorpazorp.com, but now it's finally time to fully assemble and lay out the megaboard. Our first question is, where on earth are we going to put this thing? Last time I did this layout, I had to use my living room floor, which was a bit of a nightmare, so I was planning on using the backyard, but apparently the Aussie weather had one last spanner to throw in the works before we moved to New Zealand. So here we are again. This room is just 13 feet wide, and the board at its wider points is actually a bit more than that, so it's going to be a bit of a squeeze to get it all in. So my good mate Ryan from Battlecraft Hobbies jumped over to the storage unit with me and started the mammoth task of bringing over all the boards. We started with Minas Tirith, building the first 2 Tubertown boards at the end of the living room, and it is so good to see this baby fully together as a fully painted piece, and also we can now see that we absolutely nailed the grass between the 2 boards. It matches perfectly, and the piece just comes alive with that popping contrast between the greenery and earthy tones, and then the crisp white walls of the city.
Chuck it on the floor somewhere. So as Ryan just brings in another piece of 40 kilos of Ramus by himself, this is essentially the finished portion of Minas Tirith, which is now completed. There is more, but we're not going to do that until the very end. Next, it's time to start adding the Pelennor.
Are you stuck?
No, we're good.
Look at him, smashing it. Straight on the floor.
Don't say that, I'll drop it.
Mad bastard just soloing the Ramus. That thing weighs like 20 kilos. Gently.
The Pelennor is at first a very simple board. It's basically a big old field of grass, at least in the movies, but the location itself has some points of interest that I incorporated into the board back in 2018, namely the crumbling outer ring wall, the Ramus Echor, and the many farms and homesteads that are represented by our small settlement. Then to spice it up, we have some orc camps, LED fire and real smoke-filled fire trenches, some boggy marshland, and of course over 200 corpses, including 3 dead Muakil, and then 5 massive siege towers to create the atmosphere of this location during the Siege of Gondor.
This is just absolutely mental. Of course, we have laid some of these pieces together before, but we've never had the full curve of wall, fully grassed. Pelennor just feels so much bigger with this extra part in the front of Minas Tirith. Wow, I think it's time to do some Osgiliath. Get it in here.
And then our final piece of the puzzle is the absolute monster Osgiliath flooded city layout. A whopping 60 square feet board with over 12 feet in length that I'm hoping will squeeze into our room. But our first little stumble here is that our assembly for Minas Tirith and the Pelennor has the same base foundation height, but Osgiliath was mounted on a timber baseboard to stop it warping with all those resin pores. So I slapped down some foam stripping to ramp up part of the Ramus, and that works surprisingly well.
How bloody good, mate. Problem solved.
Then we slapped in the 2 riverbank pieces in line with the Pelennor and assembled all of the modular Games Workshop ruins from our Sprue Mountain Osgiliath build, and then it was time to try and squeeze in the 3rd and final sections.
Oh. Just 5 millimeters of clearance.
With Osgiliath spanning the full width of the room, we were suddenly faced with some logistical challenges which were interesting to try and overcome.
You guys are over there, and we're over here with 5 feet of board all the way across the room. Do I take the back door or do I jump over the board? I think I jump over the board. Nailed it. So, this is everything that's fully finished. 60 square feet of Osgiliath, 48 square feet of Pelennor, and 5 by 8, 40 square feet of Minas Tirith. All of this is completely done with a few little tweaks here and there, But that's not all of it. We have a lot more of Minas Tirith that isn't fully built into the board, so we're gonna have a layout, a look at that, and we can finally see everything that's been built so far for the Siege of Gondor. Ryan's not game to make the jump. Can you get through?
Victory.
Then we slapped down some green foam to give us the right wall height and laid down almost all of our remaining wall pieces, and then deployed many of the amazing MDF buildings that Viv from Knights of Dice built for us. You can see his full build down in the description, and we very quickly ran out of room. I am really going to need a bigger place to set this all up when it comes to filming our massive siege game later in the year.
The full Siege of Gondor mega layout. This is mental to see this all finally together in one, albeit slightly too small room, but we crammed it in here. This is just monstrous. I've been working on all of this for so long, decade really, but most intensely the last sort of 4 or 5 years, and not just me as well. So many people have contributed to this project. Obviously the Tubatown collabs, all our community donations, we've got siege towers, walls, buildings, ruins, so much is here from a lot of people. So thank you to everyone who's contributed to this project so far, and this kind of closes the first chapter on this board's journey. But there will be more, but probably not for quite some time now. I am blown away to be sitting among, I think, the biggest Middle-earth wargaming board on the planet.